Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of a global monoculture.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be focusing specifically on language.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're all kind of familiar with monoculture right, when it comes to, like, agriculture.
Right, yeah.
Like, we all know that, if you have a field and it's all one crop and some disease comes along, it's going to wipe out the whole field, right? If there's diversity, then some plants may be more susceptible and some may be less.
Right.
So there's that kind of safety net that you get with diversity. But we're talking about culture.
Right.
And more specifically, language.
Exactly, yeah. And so to kind of jump into this, we have an excerpt from a paper by Dr. Lev Nemotin.
Okay.
And the title is a little bit provocative.
Catchy.
It's very catchy.
It's clickbaity. Right.
It is. It's like one language, one culture.
Yeah.
Apocalypse, monoculture, or bored to death.
Yeah. What's going to happen?
Yeah. And so, I mean, just right off the bat, Dr. Nemotin is kind of setting us up with this question of, like, is a global monoculture, specifically in the realm of language, something that we should be concerned about? Is this something that could potentially be detrimental?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are sort of thinking about this, or at least feeling this.
Yeah.
Like, anecdotally, we see that English is becoming more and more dominant.
Right, yeah.
Like, people are learning English all over the world.
Yeah.
And it is sort of this connecting force, right? Like, you can go anywhere, and if you speak English, you can kind of get by, at least to a certain degree.
Right.
So that's great for, communication.
Yeah.
But what about everything else that comes along with language?
Exactly. And that's a big point that Dr. Nemotin is making.
Yeah.
Is that language is not just this, tool for communication.
Right.
It's like this vessel for culture, for thought, for humor, for emotion, for all these things that are really hard to translate.
Yeah, there are all these like idioms and things that, like, if you try to explain to someone from a different culture, they just look at you like, what are you talking about?
Right, exactly.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've definitely run into that.
Yeah.
Even just, trying to explain American slang to people from different countries. It's like, you can kind of get the gist across, but you lose the feeling.
Yeah, the essence.
The nuance.
Nuance, yeah. And so, I mean, this is where this idea of cultural filtering comes in.
Yeah, so it's like, imagine all these, like, proverbs and sayings that are unique to different cultures.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they often carry, like, wisdom or, like, cultural values.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And some of them, if you try to translate them, it doesn't make any sense in another language.
Yeah.
So those might just disappear.
Right.
There's no equivalent.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, we're losing all this, like, wisdom and these unique ways of looking at the world.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, that agricultural analogy that we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, the monoculture.
Yeah. If you have a field that's just like all one crop.
Yeah.
It might be really productive for a while.
Right.
But then some disease comes along.
Right.
And boom.
A whole thing is wiped out.
The whole thing is gone.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is the question, right? Like, could a monoculture of language actually stifle innovation?
Yeah, because, I mean, if we're all thinking in the same way, I mean, there's this hypothesis, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which suggests that, like, the language we speak actually influences how we think.
Wow.
So if we're all speaking the same language, does that mean we're all going to be thinking the same way?
And so are we going to, like, lose that ability to come up with new ideas?
Exactly.
To think outside the box, yeah.
Yeah, and to think critically, right?
Yeah.
Like, if everyone is just kind of, like, following the same train of thought, who's going to challenge that?
Right.
Who's going to say, hey, maybe there's a different way of looking at this?
Right.
Ow.
And so it's like, there are these potential downsides. But, I mean, wouldn't a common language, in theory, also help us to understand each other better?
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe even avoid conflicts.
Yeah, I mean, think about, like, global collaboration on things like climate change or, scientific research.
Yeah.
I mean, having a common language would definitely facilitate progress in those areas. So, yeah, there's definitely that argument to be made.
Right. So it's like, there are these benefits.
Yeah.
But there are also these potentially very, very serious downsides.
Yeah.
And Dr. Namotin also talks about how, like, okay, let's say, for the sake of argument, that a monoculture is more stable.
Yeah.
You know, we all understand each other. We're all on the same page.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it also be kind of boring?
Yeah, totally.
Like, imagine traveling the world and everything is just the same.
Yeah. It's like, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. You lose all of that.
Yeah.
Diversity, you lose all of that.
The spice of life.
The spice of life, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you know, this kind of leads to this other point that Dr. Namotin brings up.
Yeah.
Which is that if everyone's thinking the same way,
yeah,
who's going to point out when we're headed in the wrong direction?
Exactly.
Like, you need those dissenting voices.
Yeah.
You need those people who are willing to say,
yeah,
wait a minute, maybe this isn't the best course of action.
Yeah, and he actually suggests that, like, a unified global culture might be prone to making reckless decisions.
Oh.
Like, if everyone's just kind of going along with the same idea,
Yeah.
you know, groupthink, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one's gonna, like, pump the brakes.
Right, exactly.
And he even uses the analogy of the Tower of Babel.
Oh, interesting.
Like, this idea that, like, this ambition and this unity without, you know, diverse thought could actually lead to its own downfall.
That's a really powerful analogy.
Yeah.
And it kind of, like, brings all of these points together.
Yeah.
So it's like we have this potential loss of cultural richness. Mm-hmm. We have a world that could potentially be less intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
And maybe even less stable.
Right.
Because we lack those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's heavy.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And it all kind of boils down to this question, right?
Yeah.
Like, if language shapes thought, then what happens to our ability to think critically and to innovate?
Yeah.
If we're all thinking in the same language.
Big question.
Yeah, big questions. And unfortunately, we don't have the answers to all of them.
Right.
But it's definitely something that we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
And, you know, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I just want to encourage everyone to really appreciate the diversity of languages that we have out there.
Yeah.
And to think about what we could be losing if we allow that diversity to disappear.
Yeah. Keep those languages alive.
Keep those languages alive, exactly.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.